G'day, it's Huck. This is something a little bit different for the weekend. I just wanted to introduce you to our new podcast. It's called The Crackling, where we share the stories of Australia's best chefs, butchers, artisans, and pork producers. This is the first episode in the series where we feature Louis Tikaram from Stanley in Brisbane. We'll be releasing new episodes weekly, so search for The Crackling in your favourite podcast app to subscribe. We'll be back with a new episode of Deep in the Weeds on Monday. In the meantime, enjoy the first episode of The Crackling.
Probably went for about 3 or 4 months where just nothing was going right for me, just nothing. It was just, it was just hell every day. I was just constantly messing up and burning things and taking too long but that's where I really learnt to cook.
This is The Crackling. I'm Anthony Huckstep. We're not all born with talent. We're not all born with opportunity. But a tenacious, never say never spirit can open up many doors and experiences. Louis Tikaram grew up in the New South Wales country town of Mullumbimby. When he turned 18, he took a chance on a gut instinct, and it set him on a culinary path he'd never imagined.
So Louis Tikaram, back in Australia, mate, after taking LA by storm at EP and LP. What brought you back here? And to Brisbane?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's kind of, people say I'm back to Australia, but I'm just as shocked. But for me, it's not really back to the area. It's not back to Australia. It's back to the area I kind of grew up, me and my wife. When I finished school in 2003, the Byron area, it was there's a few restaurants, but it was something that, I never thought I'd probably find a career around, when I left. And that's why I just HSC, pen down.
Were you going to be a chef? Or
yeah, well, that was kind of, I grew up in between Mullumbimby and Fiji. So
that's a big difference.
So my father's Fijian, but even more of a twist, he's Fijian Chinese Indian. So his mum's Fijian Chinese and his father's Fijian Indian.
Wow.
So growing up in that household, you just never knew what was going to be on the dinner table. Was it going to be chicken chop suey and steamed fish, ginger and shallot? Or was it going to be goat curry with fresh roti? Or was it going to be polusami with kakonda? So it was always kind of different. And then in Fiji, we didn't have television till 1996. So basically you would come home and that was your entertainment. You didn't just veg out on the couch and scroll on the iPad, and when you were a kid you went and you helped cook, or you helped.
So you were in the kitchen from an early age?
Yeah, exactly. So I just loved to be with my grandma in the kitchen and watching her cook and watching her put together all the food, and then sitting down and talking and eating and sharing and laughing and for hours.
Was there any dishes you can tell us about, like cooking with your grandmother, that that have been important to you?
Yeah, like definitely like her, like a Fijian chicken curry. So Fijian cuisine, there's the traditional cuisine, but then there's what our families created through this multicultural background, where it almost created like a Malaysian style curry, because you had the fresh coconut cream in Fiji, but then you had the Indian influence with the dried spices. And like if you talk to a Fijian and you say, like Fiji chicken curry, it's just like this star anise and cassia and curry leaves and coconut, and it's a whole kind of genre of cooking this kind of style of curry. So that's definitely, like, even my wife can cook it as well, because it's almost like a little rite of passage. Yeah, like if you spend time in Fiji, you learn this style of cuisine. Yeah.
Unreal. So you left Mullumbimby
so
after your HSC?
Yep. So while I was in school, my main goal was I wanted a car. I love to surf. I love to hang out, and we went, growing up, I grew up on a farm in 110 acres. So just our driveway was a 3 kilometre dirt road. So I'd be riding my bike everywhere, and I wanted a car. And so there was a kind of rinky-dink old Thai restaurant in town, and I went in and I needed a job, and they said, yeah, you can wash dishes, you know. So I said, okay, great, perfect, done. And so I started washing dishes at Gecko Thai. And
did you know much about Thai food?
No, nothing, never really. My grandfather, Indian, he called it Thai, so he didn't know much about Thai food. I'm like, what? So anyway, yeah, I didn't know much about Thai, and then so I was washing dishes, and there was just a Thai woman and one other guy that helped her in the kitchen. And one day he didn't turn up, and I was washing, and then I could see her just going down, and so I went to help her, and she was kind of like, oh, wow, you know a bit about cooking? I was like, yeah, I cook with my grandma a lot. And I'm like, cumin, currant, you know, turmeric. And she's like, I think she really just saw cheap labor, to be honest. She was like, So then she said, I'll find another person. You can start to help me. So straight after school, I'd go make curry puffs and skewers, and that's where it really started. And I was pretty much every single weekend and every night after school, I would go and cook.
Was that the roots? I mean, you ended up at like Longrain.
Well, which is
a pretty important restaurant in our culinary history.
That's when I kind of fell in love with Thai food. And even though it was like country Thai, I loved it. I just loved the aromas and that complexity of flavour. And you know, I went out in Byron one night during year 12. I think I just turned 18, and I met a guy at the beach hotel, and he was like, "Oh, you cook?" And I think they just finished work at Finn's. So I could tell they were the tattoos, and they were kind of and I was like, oh. And I started chatting. He's like, dude, if you want to cook Thai food, there's this spot in Sydney. It's just open. It's called Longrain, and that's like, if you want to know anything about anyone or Thai food, that's where you go. So I only had that one word in my head.
Yep.
And obviously none and none of my friends even knew what a restaurant or anything like that. And so that's what I did. My brother he went to Sydney Uni, HSC, pens down. I bought my car, packed it with all my stuff, looked in a revision mirror. My mum's there crying. And I said, if it doesn't work, Mum, I'll just drive back. Like, it's no biggie. Drove to Sydney, turned up at my brother's. He was in Chippendale and Abercrombie Street. Left my car, and he said, okay, what's the plan? I'm like, I'm going to go to this spot, Longrain, tomorrow, and apparently it's like, you know, super cool, and I want to work there. And
so there wasn't a job going, you wanted a job there?
Yeah, I'd never even stepped foot into a restaurant, like a good restaurant, ever, you know, like ever. So this was the whole, and my brother was like, great, cool, excellent. So I knew I could walk there, so he told me how to get there, and I walked through. You know, this is when Chippendale wasn't a nice suburb, you know, so I walked through Chippendale and the Central, and then went to Surrey Hills and turned up at this huge, beautiful glass windows, you know, and I walked in, and I still remember exactly, you know, it's so vivid in my memory. And I walked in and I said, hi, can I talk to someone about a job? And she was like, oh, do you have an appointment? Did I know you're coming? And I was like, an appointment? It's a restaurant. Like, what do you mean, like an appointment? You know, make food. And Marty came out, and I could just still, must have been cleaning crab, and he had his tea towel over, and he was like, what? And I was like, I was just wondering if there's a possible for to like work here as a chef. And he was like, no, like, no. So I kind of just, if you know Marty, his face, I wasn't going to argue with this guy. So I was like, okay. So I left, and I went back to my brother's, and he said, oh, how was it? And I said, oh, didn't go kind of how I planned. And he's like, well, what are you going to do? I said, I'll just go back tomorrow. So I went back the next day. Pretty much exactly the same thing happened. And I went home, and he asked me again. I told him, and he's like, well, you're not going to stay on my couch forever, so you better sort it out. So I said, I'm going to go back tomorrow. And then I went back the next day, and same thing. And he just said, oh, you're a persistent little fucker, aren't you? And then from that day on, he took me in, and he showed me a room which is about the same size as this, kind of like 5 meters by 3 meters, and there was a meat grinder and a coffee grinder. And that's all I saw for the next year. So I just ground curry paste and spices every day, day in, day out, from 7 in the morning till 6 at night.
Well, it's aromatic, if nothing else.
So I went home the first couple of days, and I woke up and my uniform wasn't at my brother's, and then I kind of looked out the back into the courtyard, and it was all on the courtyard out the window from the 2-story terrace. And he's like, it stinks. It stinks of garlic and onion. And so, yeah, and so that's what I did. So I just worked at Long Range. Marty bought me my first chef jacket, my knife. I didn't have anything, I didn't even know you needed these things to work in a restaurant. So he really took me under his wing, and I put away deliveries, strained all the stocks, pressed the pork hock, made curry paste, ground spice, and that was it. That was
that pork hock was pretty significant dish, under Long Grain and its sort of celebration as a restaurant. Like how many did you do there? I mean, what was involved in that dish?
Oh, we used to do 4 trays of pork hock, so 5 times 6. There's 30 hocks in each tray. So we braised them in a really beautiful aromatic master stock for about 4 hours. And then we deboned the hock and then checked it for bones, and then kept the skin completely intact, and then pressed them in trays kind of in the vice versa, so they almost like locked in.
Yeah.
And then would put, it would have been at least easily 100 kilos, and then press them down for 24 hours, and then pop them out, and then cube them, and then that was the dish. Yeah. So, and that would be 4 trays, so 100 hocks every day, 7 days a week. So,
was there one person on that section?
Yeah, me plus curry paste plus. So it was like a real rude awakening, to what hospitality was, and oh my God, we worked with this French guy, and if he found a bone, because then I would do all the base, and then they would just come and it's all ready. And if he found a bone in the pork hock, oh my God, Lord have mercy, I was in like, I'd just be screamed at for so long. A, because it could have damaged his knife, and B, just because I was the punching bag of the kitchen. So
Long Grain is interesting in your career, given that that's almost a starting point.
Yeah.
Certainly in a big time restaurant. You left and you gained some serious street cred with other places.
Yeah.
Like Bentley, Tetsuya's, and then you ended up coming back around to Long Grain and winning Young Chef of the Year and running the restaurant.
Yeah, it was quite amazing. It was, like I owe Marty, everything. If it wasn't for him, I just don't know how my life would have, played out if he didn't accept me that day. I could be could have lived a completely different life. So we always kept in touch, through all the different restaurants I worked at, and then I ventured overseas and I worked in Southamptons and Canada, and travelled through Scandinavia and Europe and back down into Southeast Asia. And that whole trip was about expanding my repertoire and my horizon of food, because I fell in love with Thai cooking, and I was obsessed with it. But then I didn't want to sell myself short. I wanted to experience all different types of cuisines. So I traveled through Turkey and Egypt and Europe and Spain and Portugal and Scandinavia, and hoping that I would kind of find that kind of fire in my belly for a different cuisine as well, other than Asian. And I thought I did when I traveled to Italy, and it was like amazing, and the Naples and the pizza and the cheese, and and then it was so cool. And then I kind of traveled. I went to Egypt, and then from Egypt I got a cheap flight from Cairo to Bangkok, and I kind of got off the plane in Bangkok, and just instantly that humidity and plastic furniture and grilling meats and fish sauce and somtam, and then I was like, who am I kidding? This is it.
I'm sold. I want to go there now.
Yeah. So that's when, and then I flew back home after Southeast Asia, and I landed in Sydney. I think I got an early flight, and I landed, and I was staying with my auntie in Potts Point. And then I kind of like had a little nap and got up and went downstairs out onto kind of Macleay Street, and I wanted to get a coffee, and then Who do I see? First person. Why the fuck haven't you called me? I'm like, Marty, I just got back, literally. I just got back, you know, and he's like, oh, okay, what do you want to do? You want to get tea or something later? And I was like, yeah, that sounds good. He's like, meet me at Longrain. And so we got to Longrain, literally just landed, and he was in a hard hat. And it was when the whole...
Muddy boats and a hard hat.
yeah, I didn't know what I was in for, actually.
It sounds more like YMCA.
And that was the renovations of Longrain, 10 years on, and they took over the downstairs and they created the canteen, and he was like, wow, what do you we did a big walkthrough, and he said, what do you think? And I said, mate, it's awesome, like it's great, it's like a whole nother rebirthing of Longrain. I think it's great. And he goes, no, what do you think? Like, you want to run it? So here I was, like, I built my reputation out, like I went Longrain, then Bentley, then Tats, and
which are very different to Longrain.
Yeah,
I mean, you need tweezers in some of that.
Yeah,
you like Brent Savage, Tetsuya, amazing chefs, amazing cuisine, but very big detour.
Very, yeah. So I've always been a bit of a sucker for punishment, just chucking myself into the deep end. And that's kind of how it all kind of unraveled, And I just, when I went traveling, I kind of thought, am I going to just throw all this away? Like all the kind of how hard I've worked to get to these restaurants and then just chuck it away to go backpacking kind of thing. And I didn't know what my future was when I landed back in Sydney. I didn't know if I would have had to start again from the bottom and do it all again. But just like that first day I walked into Longrain, kind of 6 years earlier, it all, it just all kind of unfolded. And within the end of the day, I was running the joint, and I left it as a second-year apprentice, so... That's
pretty frightening, tenacious little guy tapping on the door to running it.
Yeah.
So, like, this fire in your belly to sort of jump in the deep end and just, go for it without sort of knowing what you're getting yourself into. Is that what lured you to LA? Like, that sort of a challenge?
Yeah, it was...
Because, I mean, I guess you got to give them an experience of Australian cuisine with Asian influences and all of your rich history that you'd built up that maybe they hadn't seen before.
No, yeah, definitely. And that was another amazing experience of, an individual just trusting me and being like, okay, if that's what you want to do, let's just do it. So, I went to LA, and completely different restaurant, completely different concept, completely different food, completely different style of service, completely different flavors, not even for the customer, but also for the cooks that were preparing the food, like no server or cook or anyone had used lemongrass, turmeric, coriander,
which we kind of take for granted.
Yeah, for us, it's on every kind of streets corner. And that's kind of what I explained to them. I said, this is our Mexican. So imagine, every corner, everything, there's a little Mexican, there's something. This is our influence in Australia. It's kind of Southeast Asian. Yeah, so LA was it was a really cool story, really cool, and that's what I was doing. I was telling basically a story of my life, the cuisine that inspired me, the place that I had worked, and the places that I've travelled.
Was there a dish that you couldn't take off the menu over there that some people sort of got that you kind of was important to you? Or?
Yeah, I think a really big one was, there was a couple. One was kokonda, which is a Fijian-style ceviche with fresh squeezed coconut cream and sea grapes and cherry tomatoes, and it was a dish that probably the earliest dish I ever learned to cook with my grandmother. And because of that link to Mexican cuisine, I think that was always a good segue into the American palate and the American way of thinking. If they can compare it to something that they knew, they'd give it a whirl.
Yeah.
So it was like Fijian ceviche, and then I was like, wow, this is really cool. It's like a ceviche, but that richness of the coconut cream really makes it, quite special. So that was a great dish. A dan dan noodle with pork neck, which was really awesome, with a lot of Szechuan, and they knew that kind of typical Chinese cuisine. But then when I started delving into a little bit more complex flavors of Chinese. They could still understand the food and relate to it quite well.
And dan noodles, that's a cracking dish.
It's so good.
I try and make it at home, and it's not a bad version. I don't do pork neck, and I'll have to steal your recipe.
It's just perfect. Yeah, like pork neck, you just dice pork neck and then just saute it and then just like work it into the Szechuan sauce and over top of the noodles. Yeah, it's really good. Yeah, so it's cool. Like EP really, it almost changed, a whole city's kind of eating habits, and it didn't kick off straight away, but I just kind of stuck to it, and I wasn't going to move over to the other side of the world and not cook the food that I want to cook. I was happy at Long Grain, I would just happily because I was able to cook the food that I love to eat, so I wasn't going to change it, and kind of got to a point where it was like, well, it hasn't really taken off yet, but I wanted to just stick to my guns, and then finally it started to gain some traction, and then it really just went like gangbusters.
Well, yeah, I mean, you were huge, the restaurant was huge, and that surprises me that you came back and you came to Brisbane, which I've got to concede, from a food point of view, it's changed dramatically in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
But what lured you here? Like?
My good friend Jonathan Barthelmess, he's
got Grecker and
Yoko, which is right next door.
And the Apollo in Sydney.
Apollo and Chocho, and so he's always been a really good friend and someone that I really trust their opinion. Not only in food, though in restaurant scene and business as well. And he came for his 40th birthday actually and celebrated at EP. And he's originally from Burleigh, and he's like, Louis, man, like, I know you're from, like Mullumbimby, and, Brisbane's like, it's going off. And I was like, really? And he's like, yeah. He's like, you could possibly even like live around Mullum and still just, commute, or, I know your parents are still there. And yeah, it never really occurred to me that I could have the best of both worlds. I could be around the area that I grew up and around my family, and also work at a great restaurant. So,
did you ever envisage doing Cantonese?
Yes. Well, it was always it's one of my favorite foods to eat. I feel just stemming from those kind of meals that my grandmother used to cook me, and her father had one of the first Cantonese restaurants in Fiji,
right,
the Canton Cafe in Suva on Mark Street. And then together with, that kind of rite of passage of going to Golden Century for the first time, being a young cook in Sydney and eating like the live seafood and the pipis and exo, and it's a very nostalgic cuisine, I think, to any chef that came up in Sydney. And Brisbane just doesn't have any, just didn't have anything like it. And I always wanted to continue to grow and to develop my skills. That's why I really love hospitality, because it's an industry where we don't stop learning and growing. And I always wanted to keep kind of expanding my repertoire and my reputation of the food that I wanted to cook. I never wanted to be painted into the corner of being, he's a Southeast Asian guy. We can't really have him there. He just only does Southeast Asians. Where I wanted to make sure that, I'm kind of expanding and able to adapt to all different types of cuisines. Yeah.
Stanley's got like lots of classic Cantonese dishes. I mean, what's your approach here? Like, are you doing modern twists, or like how do you approach doing something like that? I mean, it's a huge restaurant as well.
It's a big restaurant, and I suppose from when I got back to Brisbane, my style or my approach to the menu changed drastically, because I don't know if it's because I was away for so long or I never cooked in Queensland, but the produce is just, it's still, it's like pinch yourself moments, like just the seafood coming in and the vegetables from these small Asian markets and the beef and the pork coming just from a few hours away, and getting direct with the farm or the farmer, and just the kind of like limited amount of hands it passes through.
Yeah.
It's still like a kind of a country town in some sense of dealing with these suppliers. And so, Cantonese food is such a perfect cuisine to just showcase good produce, showcase steamed fish, showcase local bugs, showcase Harvey-based scallops, Mooloolaba prawns, Gundawindi pork, stockyard beef. It's all from around here.
Yeah.
And there's all these little Asian growers, and I'm using these smaller guys, and they're just sending me a picture of a plot of gailan saying, "Is this the size you want it?" And I'm like, yeah, that's good. And he's like, great, I'll take, Stan will just take that plot. So the farmer's happy because he's sold the whole plot. He doesn't have to wheel and deal his gailan at the markets and things, where he's just going to, harvest it and send it to my guy, and my guy's just going to bring it to me. So,
do you see that as something happening in the Brisbane scene, or is it more Australia, and that's how it's changed since you've been gone, and there's more sort of linking to quality produce and connection with farmers?
Yeah, like definitely. I met a fisherman, Chris Bolton, from far north Queensland, and he was on this seesaw where the fishing industry was going one way, where it was just going big and trawling, and to kind of keep afloat, that was the way you had to go, because this small kind of wheeling dealing wasn't really working. And then he kind of said that he turned a corner and went, hey, how about if I just supplied the best quality fish that I can possibly supply just a few people, not on that large scale. And he just couldn't believe it. Saved his whole business, family, and whole career, because that, and then it just took off, and it was like, and now I get fish sent directly, from him, exactly the way he's packed the box, and it's still like a pinch yourself moment when you eat that coral trout. It's like something I've never tasted before in my life. Like the amount of care and the amazing thing in Brisbane, people, they're buying it, and I think like Brisbane clientele are so patriotic that if it's a local farmer or a local fisherman, they're willing to pay, and they know I'm not getting it for cheap, and then they're not getting it for cheap either, but they're supporting the local kind of industry, which is pretty amazing. So like Brisbane's just been a whole bunch of surprises so far.
Mate, you sound like an apprentice, like you just started cooking again. You're like full of it's just, eyes wide open.
Yeah, it's amazing.
What is it about working in this industry that that you love?
I just I know it sounds kind of corny, but just like doing what you love, every day. It's just I feel often I just feel very selfish, because there's not a lot of people that are really truly so passionate and love what they do every day, and get off on kind of ingredients that they're cooking, or a customer's reaction, or just how grateful people are for good food, and I really kind of appreciate it a lot for doing this.
It sounds like you've had a pretty stellar career, and you have, and a lot of drive behind it, but there's got to be some pretty big mess-ups along the way. Like where you've been yelled at head chefs and stuff like that. Like, have you ever ruined a service, or you got some funny stories behind that?
It was probably when I went to Bentley. And you could probably imagine a guy that just rolled in off the street from Mullumbimby, no training, no nothing, only knew lemongrass and lime leaf, only knew how to cut angel hair as fine as possible, then go into a kind of under a chef like Brent Savage, who's got quite unique style of cooking, and to go into a team of 4 guys, lunch and dinner, doubles every day, and 4 people in the kitchen cooking, degustation. There's not much room for training wheels.
Right. And that kitchen was tiny.
The kitchen
like the
was
original
tiny,
Bentley.
yeah. And I kind of told him a porcupine as well. I told him I was a fully qualified chef when I'd only been cooking for 2 years. So I knew like he didn't want to. I knew that he didn't really want to hire, you know, any apprentices. I think he was just looking for like the real deal. You know, there was Dan Hong, Dave Verhool, myself, and Brent. You know, so it was already a bit of. There was a bit of talent in the kitchen already, and so I just told him, "Oh, I'm qualified. You know, I'm like, yeah, I'm ready to roll whenever you need me." And he used to come into Long Grain a lot, and that's how we met. So when he opened Bentley, he said, "Oh, if you want a job, come up." And I said, "Okay," but I was still kind of tied into a hospitality placement kind of apprenticeship thing. So I just kind of like winged it. I went, I started, and I was kind of cooking. And one day the woman walked into the restaurant, and she said, "I just wasn't looking for you at Long Grain, but they told me you didn't work there anymore." And all I heard was "Louis," and I went out. oh hey, how are you? But then, you know, like Brent said, no, he's working as, you know, he's fulfilling all his duties as a fully qualified chef. So I got signed off, you know, of my apprenticeship. So
what's he like to work for? Because he's such a nice guy.
Oh,
is he a brute in the kitchen?
Those days, yeah. So I was, you know, obviously I was way over my head, you know, and it probably went for about 3 or 4 months where just nothing was going right for me, just nothing. It was just hell every day. I was just constantly messing up and burning things and taking too long, or, you know, and but that's where I really learnt to cook. You know, that's where I really, you know, it was just, you know, there was so much responsibility on you and so much pressure, and that's where I really turned a corner in being able to stay composed and to just push through and to really, I suppose that kind of satisfaction as well from kind of growing and learning and then finally mastering a technique or a section. Because Brent it was quite hard, you know, and he had a lot of pressure on him as well. You know, it was like we opened up, we got 2 hats, we got best new restaurant. You know, it was a lot. You know, so he was kind of under the microscope, and it just showed me that passion and that drive that Brent had as well, that really to kind of blow all expectations out of the water by just keeping your head down and just working and letting that passion kind of speak for itself. You don't have to, you know, come in guns blazing and you can let your food do the talking, and that's really like what Brent did in those early days of Bentley, which was really cool. But
has there been a moment when you realised, I'm good at this?
Well, that's kind of that's a funny thing you say that, because I wasn't the best at school, and I didn't, you know, there wasn't much I was kind of good at, or there wasn't a very clear outcome for when I was in those late teens. I think my parents might have been a little bit worried, but, you know, they've always stuck by me. But then when I started cooking, I was like, oh wow, I think this is something I can do, because I enjoy it, I love it, I'm good at it. And I think that's when, at Long Grain, when Marty started just piling more and more kind of pressure on me when I was only about 19. Like, he took me to Melbourne to open up Long Grain Melbourne. Right. Instead of like all the different head chefs and sous chefs, he took me, and that's when I really learnt. And he kind of said, I'm taking you because I trust your palate, you know, so when I'm doing other things, you can make sure that things are tasting, you know, correctly. And that was from him kind of making nam gins from scratch and balancing these flavors that you would never normally think would possibly become a kind of a harmonious flavor, you know, straight lime juice, straight fish sauce, coriander roots, chili, and palm sha. How do you make that taste good? It's just these 5 like crazy ingredients, you know.
Absolutely, but they're wild together when it's right.
When it's right. So that's kind of, he honed those skills into me at quite a young age, and now I really enjoy teaching that to younger guys as well, like letting them finally balance and train their palate to pick up on different flavors.
Cool. Can we go down into the kitchen? Have a look at what you do?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
I'd love to see you in action. Maybe eat some food too. Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is the Crackling.
So how do you feel like when you get in the kitchen? Like, how does it make you feel working as a chef?
Well, it's like, you know, some people like, oh, how do you do, you know, like it's long hours or it's, you know, it's hard. But to be honest, it's kind of funny. I love to be here, the first person as well. I just enjoy the kind of serenity of the kitchen and getting a coffee, and it's pretty amazing here. It puts a whole nother spin on it at Stanley, because
to be fair, it's a pretty good kitchen. You got the Brisbane River just there.
You've got the river at the front. I can have a coffee there and just have a thing. It's come in and it's all green marble and brass, and it almost, honestly, it feels like a sense of achievement every time I come in here, where it's like, wow, look at this environment. I feel like I've earned to work here, and I've earned to kind of have this as a place that I call my kitchen. So yeah, it's every day it's like a reward, I suppose, when I come into the kitchen, and then to have, you know, to be able to train guys and to teach them, like I said before, like a skill set that they will, you know, take for them for the rest of their career, just as I was taught. Yeah. And the possibilities are limitless for them, you know. So it's cool to see people just at the start of their kind of amazing journey that
totally.
They've
and
got.
You've been talking about the influence of Marty Burt's, of Brent Savage, you know, of all these different things you've done in your career, but now you're the mentor here.
Yeah. So it's kind of cool, the apprentice becoming the master. Yeah, I think.
But everyone, cool. It is a bit cooler. I mean, you guys are wearing jeans these days. Like, how was it back in the day when you were an apprentice? What were you wearing then?
It was very different, you know. Like Marty, and that's where I really learnt to be very particular, you know, working for Marty. And it wasn't only in the food, in a sense. I was with the dustpan and broom, you know, dusting the cigarette butts from around the trees on the street, or making sure the glass was clean. So it was quite amazing. And I only ever worked for chef owners, Brent, Tetsuya, Marty, Sam, Nick, you know. So this kind of sense of pride inside and outside of the kitchen was huge for me, and making sure that staff were well looked after, the restaurant and equipment, and, you know, everything was really well looked after. And it's something that I'm trying to kind of instill into these young cooks as well, that, you know, people are looking for the whole package when they're looking for a chef, for sure.
So pork is pretty integral in Cantonese cuisine. There's classic dishes, and you're doing some classics here.
Yeah.
So can we run through, like, the crispy pork belly?
Yeah, so like, this is a dish that, you know, it was kind of, my grandma used to cook it a lot. My grandmother was a very, suyuk was a very important part, because the pork in Fiji is very good. Like, it's very, really, really beautiful pork. There's wild boar as well, but plus the pork is very, very nice. I think it's the humidity. It's my kind of.
So does that make you fussy with the sort of producer that you use here, and like the sort of pork that you're looking for?
Yeah, well, I really like the pork in Fiji. It's very subtle, I think, which is a massive, kind of must when you're roasting suyuk, because it's not masked in anything. It's not marinated. You know, it's just simply we blanch the belly, and then we spike it, and then we rub salt into the skin, and then dry it for a couple of days.
Right.
And then
is it uncovered?
Uncovered, yeah. So we actually have fans in our cool rooms to help dry out the Peking duck and the pork, and then we roast it on a super high heat, covered in salt, to help create an even layer on the top, and then to perfect an amazing kind of crispy crackling on top.
Well, that's what everyone wants to know how to do, right? I mean, the crackling is like the gold of...
Exactly. So it is, I think anyone at home who really wants to, it's like you can either blanch the pork or steam the pork, but then it's all about spiking it like several thousands of times, and then working in salt into the skin itself and letting it dry out. And then
drying it out is the key?
Yes, yeah, big time. And then for even that like classic style roast pork, and then you can just roast it as you normally would. And then in like Southeast Asian, we would actually create a slurry with vinegar and salt and work that into the skin and dry it out as well to just give it a little bit more crunch.
So that's a pretty nice big piece of pork.
Yeah.
What sort of size pigs are you using?
This is Borrowdale pork. So this comes... It's farmed pretty close. I really enjoy the flavour and the texture of Borrowdale. These are pretty big. I think they're like 150 to 200 kg. When they're all broken down. So yeah, it's really great. We use the same pork neck for our char siu.
Yeah, nice.
So this is a little bit more involved preparation. It's a few days. So we cure it first, mainly in salt and sugar and 5-spice. That goes for kind of a couple of hours. We cure it, and then we take it out of the cure, give it a rinse, and then we marinate it in that iridescent red that you would always see in the classic Chinese barbecue, where the red comes from the fermented bean curd, and there's rose wine in there, hoisin, and some tobignon, some bean paste, and then we let that cure, marinate and cure for another kind of 2 to 3 days, and then give it a rinse, and then roast it on kind of 160 for kind of 10 minutes, and just keep basting it in honey. In a honey maltose, and then it's kind of all ready for service.
So how long are you hanging it up here for?
This will we'll get it to kind of almost where we want, and it cooks quite quickly due to the cure and the marinade, but then we just kind of like alternating it in the oven, in and out of the oven, glazing it till it's ready to serve. So we'll get it to kind of like 95% of where we want to serve it, and then to order we'll reflash it, reglaze it, and reserve it, and then serve it kind of with a nice kind of roasted eshallot, garlic, chili, 5-spice kind of sauce as well.
Beautiful. Why that cut? Why is it the neck?
The neck I think is, it's one of the most kind of underutilized cuts in pork. I think it's just so amazing, the different muscle and fat kind of groups within the neck just make it perfect for char siu, where it's tender, it's kind of chunky, and this mix of fat and different kind of lean parts of the neck. It's like so good, and it's my favorite cut for curry as well, for sure. Like an awesome like green curry, or even like a Indian style curry. Yeah, the pork neck, you just cook it to that like perfect kind of perfection of just kind of over but not too far, and it's just like melt in the mouth. Yeah, it's really good.
Now, char siu is amazing, but I think, we've skipped past, I want to know a secret to getting the crackling right on this roast pork belly.
That's the question on everyone's lips, isn't it? Always. That's like probably a number one question kind of being asked for.
So you probably don't want to give away your secrets, but is there something something that's vital?
I think really, I think kind of that 2-stage cooking, I think, is really important. I know it's really difficult when people try and perfect a crackling at home just from kind of a pork belly that they're either going to roll or just roast straight up, where you're just using 100% kind of dry heat. I think that kind of Asian style of either steaming or blanching before with the spike method, and working in salt to that skin, and like it's really like it's not just your kind of massaging in a bit. You really have to work it in almost till it becomes kind of slimy from working
Wow,
the salt
okay.
into the fat, and then it creating almost like a sludge almost, and then drying it out, and then if you roast it like that, just as you would on kind of like 220.
Yep.
You know, I
Just
think-
to start with, 220?
yeah,
Or
and then you can
then
drop it down
drop
to
it
like
down?
180, 160, and then to kind of achieve that perfect, like, but it's nice with kind of sometimes when you do it just straight dry heat, it's crunchy, but almost too crunchy,
Yeah.
where if you do the kind of double cook with the spiking, it's crunchy, but like honeycomb almost, like
Yeah, no,
like
stop it.
glass. Yeah.
We're going to have to eat some now, right?
I'm a bit of a sucker for crackling as well, yeah.
Well, I often cook pork for big groups just because I want to eat as much crackling
Yeah.
as possible. I might have to use your tips. Okay, so I guess the next thing is can we try some of this?
Yeah. So let's just check here this, guys. Yeah, so you can see this is like as part of the process.
Yeah, that looks pretty good.
Yeah, you get with that salt, you get a really nice even coat.
And I think what's nice about
And
it
then
is you haven't scored it. You know,
No.
like traditionally, like, you know, where you see a lot of people scoring the pork too.
Yeah, and you kind of ruining that kind of
It's almost like
perfect
glassy, isn't it?
even. So this you can see, if we just continued to roast it, it would all dry up all just like this part here. So it's still got a little ways to go on the top, but you can see it's starting to come in, and as it cools, it'll crunch up as well.
Is that also what happens when
Yeah.
it cools? That's when
Yeah,
the crunch comes along.
kind of you know, just like any kind of cooking with any fat or any oil, as the oil cools and solidifies,
Yeah, look at that. So how do you serve this?
just like so. We'll just do it in straight cubes, and just with some English mustard and hoisin. And
English
it's just
mustard.
that, yeah. From, you know, it's from that's why, you know, Cantonese is quite such a cool kind of cuisine as well, because it's, you know, like all great cuisine, it's influenced by different, you know, like, you know, kind of multicultural backgrounds and
Totally. When trade opened up.
invasions and
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
normally it's kind of, you know, like a bit of suspect background, but yeah, when the in Hong Kong with the colonial you know, migration there, and that's a kind of this beautiful building as well. We're standing in Stanley, that old colonial style.
Totally.
You know, it was like it was meant to be a Cantonese restaurant.
You could be anywhere but Brisbane, actually.
It's
Once you walk through the door.
amazing. Yeah, it's like unbelievable.
Should we try some?
Yeah, so try this kind of corner bit. It'll be.
I might have to loosen my belt buckle, mate.
Yeah, lucky it's in all the way in Brisbane, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so
Although you can get cheap flights these days.
I know, I know. Yeah, definitely.
That's unreal. So you do also a classic suburban Australian dish,
Oh yeah, yeah.
sweet and sour pork.
Even in Mullumbimby, we had a Far East local Chinese restaurant, and yeah, like what I was talking about, you know, just finding this really great produce, really awesome suppliers, and then, you know, not having to do a modern twist or not having to do fusion. You know, we can just do these really great classic dishes that have been around for so long that everyone's familiar with, though just do the best version anyone's ever had. And that's always been a kind of a challenge to me. You know, I did it when I went to the States, you know, in the top of the restaurant. I wanted to do this kind of cool street food snack, you know, like with the cocktails and things. But being in West Hollywood, it wasn't the, you know, people didn't gravitate to it as you would, you know, somewhere in, you know, Sydney or Melbourne but I didn't, you know, like kick up a stink and be angry and go, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. I said, well, what do they eat? So I just did a bit of a kind of reconnaissance around and seeing, and people were eating, like one thing I always saw was like a chicken sandwich, and I was like, okay, I'll just make the best fucking chicken sandwich that these guys have ever had. So we brined the chicken in like an aromatic brine of Szechuan and star anise, cassia and did an awesome like gluten-free, like super amazing crust that stayed crunchy for days, and a spicy mayo and things. And in the first weekend, I think we sold like 300 of them, and I just love that about cooking. It's like giving the customers what they want, but just giving them the best possible one they've ever had. And you don't have to change your style or kind of sell out as they would. It's like, no, you just take it as a challenge and be like, all right, you suckers want to eat chicken sandwich? All right, try this, And then it became like a cult. People were coming for the chicken sandwich, to eat the chicken sandwich, So, and that's kind of like what we've tried to create with, we've got Mongolian lamb ribs and sweet and sour pork and kung pao chicken, and just doing these really cool classic dishes, but with great produce.
Well, that sweet and sour pork, when I ate here a couple of months ago, like that reminded me of my youth, and it didn't feel any different, but it just ate a lot better. It ate like my fond memories rather than what I was actually eating, I think. But can you run us through that process, because it's actually quite light, and you enjoy like good pieces of pork in there as well. Like it's not just all batter.
No, absolutely.
And it's just like capsicum and pineapple, right?
Capsicum, pineapple, and some white onion. Classic. So the batter was, we really worked on that for a few weeks of trying rice flour, tapioca starch, glutinous rice flour, cornstarch, potato starch, kuzu starch. Just like all these different, because it's just about these different kind of variations or techniques or kind of ratios. And I literally, after about 3 weeks, we finally were just sold on a cornstarch batter. It fried the best, but then stayed super fluffy and light. Yeah. But then it absorbed the sauce, but didn't go soggy.
Yeah.
So it was like a certain kind of method to that, and just using really good quality pork neck, cooking it, awesome kind of sweet and sour that we kind of cook over a long period of time to infuse a lot of the capsicum and pineapple into the sauce itself, along with then the kind of the chunks in the stir fry itself. So
and that's one of the beauties of it. It's like it's rich with the sauce, but it's not a big gluggy sauce, because it's all caught on the pieces.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, sweet and sour. So that's an easy one. Tick it off. But it was actually one of the more involved dishes that really kind of tested us to create this kind of awesome version of it. Yeah. So it's kind of sometimes it's kind of like lots of Asian cooking. The simple dishes are the ones you can really mess up, rather than the complex ones with all the different pastes and stir fries and marinades. They're the ones that you can kind of tweak a lot and perfect, where it's those ones that just have 2 or 3 ingredients that they're really transparent, and if you mess one of those processes up or one of the ingredients, it's very easy to kind of see.
Well, Louis, I'm going to have another piece of this. But, mate, it's been unreal. Thanks for letting us be in your kitchen.
Oh, of course. No, it's great. I'm glad to share it.
I think that Crackling's calling me. So. Thanks, mate.
You're welcome. Thank you.
This is The Crackling, a Deep in the Weeds production in partnership with PorkStar. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we catch up with some of Australia's best chefs and pork producers to discover what makes Australian pork so special.